small group, yeah. So stop me at any time and ask questions, because I'll keep it pretty informal. I'm George Ericson. I work for Dell in the storage division, and I'm responsible for pushing Swordfish and related standards into the organization as a whole across Dell. All right, so I'm going to try to give you a few pointers. You'll get these slides. So unless it's not on here, you don't need to take notes, but you'll get them. Are we doing the echo thing?
Yes.
Okay.
That is for grab after this.
I should mention, somewhere there's some notes up here about, so we're going to give away an Echo Dot, which I can tell you are cool things. I really like mine. You're welcome to take coasters and all that kind of stuff. And they're having a Twitter contest where you use the hashtag storage management and SDC 17, I believe. Someone want to empty that bowl and take?
I think I'll make sure Linda takes care of that before, we do it at the end of the session anyway, so I'll make sure that's...
Very good. Okay. I'm going to try to give you some of our experience. I've been running for the last, probably a year almost, various POCs internally, and try to give you some of the benefits of that experience. So one of the things I first started to mention is that Swordfish is really an implementation on top of Redfish and on top of OData. So OData defines several different things. One is the common schema definition language, which if you were here an hour ago, Richelle was giving you some explanation of. It also defines a data service, and that data service is driven off of an entity data model schema. The data service doesn't care what schema it is as long as it's defined in CSDL, and CSDL can be represented either in XML or in JSON. One caveat I'll tell you about. The CSDL that represents the CSDL JSON version, there's two flavors of that. One produced by Oasis and another, which is Redfish. It's JSON format. They're not exactly the same, and as you get into implementations, if you are driving off of JSON, then you may care about the difference. But I'm not going to dwell on that right now. The third part is the protocol. So OData is a RESTful protocol, so create, it's puts, posts, deletes, updates, or patches, those kind of things. In addition, it defines a set of query parameters to your request. So select and filter, search parameters. Most of those Redfish does not use. All right, Redfish keeps it simple on purpose, and that's fine. For a Swordfish environment where we're talking about enterprise class systems, talking about systems that run in a data center, you may want to be using some of that extended functionality. Don't invent your own. You're going to use the OData stuff and drive off of that. All right? When you get this presentation, all of these things are hardware links pointing to the different standards that are produced by these different groups. There's the three groups, so it's Oasis, OData, there's DMTS, Redfish and there's the Swordfish, and they're producing a number of different artifacts that are that you need to use, all right? One of my biggest caveats, and the thing that drives me the most nuts, is people will attempt to implement having sort of read the top level slides and stuff and dive into their implementation. Don't do that. Read the documents. Starting with the OData stuff, you will be much happier 6 months, 12 months in if you do that. I know it's more work, but do it anyways. Okay. So, as you start, you're going to want to understand your use cases. You're going to want to figure out what parts of things you need to build. You need to understand that neither Redfish nor Swordfish right now define very many things as being required. We define many, many resources and relationships between resources, but we don't define when you have to use them. That's coming. Redfish is working on something called profiles. Swordfish will pick up on that technology as well, and those will take for specific uses, specific use cases, will define sets of resources, relationships between those resources, actions, property, values, and all of that together to essentially create a feature that you could discover and then utilize without trying to figure it out by, looking all through the little nitty-gritty of the different things and trying to guess what works and what doesn't. But that's still to come. All right. So you need to figure out what pieces, including services like eventing and logging and data management or test management. And then the next thing you probably want to do is look at the mockups. Mockups are illustrative. They do not tell you complete systems or complete solutions. They are sort of a view into a system, a restricted kind of snapshot into the system and its values at some point in time, right? So you don't want to look at mockups as being, I should implement exactly this with these kind of values and all that. They're just a sample, all right? But they're very, very useful samples. The other thing I want to tell you about is the key structure that's used in the mockups. Mockups are essentially JSON objects stored in a file system. And as such, the references between different elements within the file system is the directory hierarchy. So the keys that you'll find in the mockups are designed to use that directory hierarchy in a very simple way, and it's very effective. So there's two kinds of keys that you'll encounter. One is as additional URL segments. So system/1 would be the first system, and that works well within the file system and within a mockup. In real life, you really want to use a unique ID of the system, for instance, for the key. So it's system/some long number or some long value, right, to keep it unique. Now the second part is that / format, or the key as segment, that's what that refers to, is less preferred by the OData guys than the other alternative, which is a parenthesized key. So you'll also see schema with system parentheses, some key value, close parentheses, and on. Okay? That's the preferred way because syntactically, there's no confusion about what's a key and what's the name of a resource. And in the unlikely case that your key had the same name as a resource, you could wind up getting confused. I don't consider that a big deal, but I also like sort of pure solutions. So the next thing you're going to want to pick as you start to implement is an implementation framework, if you will. We've worked with a couple different kinds, which I'll classify as Redfish native and OData native. Things like RecHD, which is an open source product or project that EMC started, has code in there that will deal with a Redfish interface. But that code is pretty primitive. It's really down to URL matching, and it doesn't understand the OData syntax for chasing down through URLs or parts of URLs. And it doesn't understand any of the nuances of OData attributes or annotations, what I'm looking for. So because of that, it's really hard. It was hard when we tried to do it, to extend it to cover things like the added functionality that Swordfish wants to utilize. So if your world is sort of limited, the kind of world that Redfish envisions, using a Redfish native kind of implementation is a great choice. It's simple, it's direct, and go for it. Mockups are an example of that kind of thing as well, generally. The other choice is OData native. There are a number of infrastructures available as open source. One is called Olingo, another called JStack, and others, there's a C++ one that's available. I'll talk about these in a minute. But those understand to one level or another the OData infrastructure at a meta model kind of level. So they're much more flexible and easier in the long run to extend and utilize new features. The last category in here is there are emerging some Redfish frameworks. I don't know enough about them yet to sort of say which of those two categories they land in. But you should be aware that there are some commercial variants coming down the pike, and one of those is Inside Software. So I've said the things on this slide. I'll go into the Olingo. Olingo and JStack both fully support the meta schema. They fully support the OData query language. JStack is a Node.js implementation. Olingo is a Java-based implementation. Depending on your development environment, one's going to be a better choice than the other, probably. At this point, from what we know in our investigations, the JStack should be just as good as the Olingo, but that's just from what we know. Now, in investigations, surface look. So I don't know that for sure, but I'd encourage you, if you're in a Node.js kind of environment, go ahead and look at it seriously. Olingo we have used effectively. We've gone pretty far with it. It is a good choice. The OData CPP server, which is a C++ plus one, forget about it. It's multiple years old since the last time it was upgraded. It doesn't have all the functionality. It doesn't have much documentation. So
The author gave up.
okay.
It wasn't me.
Anyways, so that's where all that is at. All right. Discovery. You're going to need some way to discover the Redfish and Swordfish services in your infrastructure. Redfish currently defines using SSDP. SSDP's got some concerns, or people using it have some concerns about network traffic. We've been starting discussions about what are the alternatives. So, if you have some opinions, speak up. But I expect that there will be other choices that we're going to want to develop against.
The world has never come up with a good discovery.
Well, that SLP was good enough, but,
It was usable,
Yeah.
but you read it.
Well,
And this is no winner, so it's just kind of,
there you go. So that's an open issue and something for you to work through. All right, some words about Swordfish specifics. You're going to use Swordfish for some different purposes. Certainly if you're talking about storage-related things of any level of complexity, you should be using Swordfish. I would tell you that Redfish has some storage functionality at the sort of the controller level, their storage resource. They have something called simple storage, which is really just a collection of devices. It's there, but it doesn't provide you the service-based provisioning. It doesn't provide you with replication or mapping to hosts and all that other stuff. It's that level of storage can be, I want to say ignored, but probably shouldn't ignore it. It's probably part of what you need to do, but it's not Swordfish. The other place you want to use it if you've got sort of a wide variety of systems that you're servicing. To simplify life for your clients, you probably should focus on going Swordfish all the way across, rather than sometimes having a Swordfish only, or Redfish only, and other times having a Swordfish. Once they learn one way to deal with things, they'll be happier. So, a Swordfish data service is a Redfish data service. Basically, out of your service implementation, whether you're talking OData or Redfish or Swordfish, you have one pipe that is your host, on a port /Redfish/v1. That's it. Now, whether you implement any of the Swordfish resources or some or all of the Redfish resources, it's still that one pipe and that one implementation. You're not talking about separate implementation for a Swordfish as opposed to a Redfish. And maybe that's obvious, but it takes all. Go ahead.
Is there a specification for somebody's implementing Swordfish without Redfish features? Do you have a recommended list of error codes for not implementing?
No, not at this time. I think you'll find that they have to implement some of the resources that are defined by
Sure.
Redfish
Sure.
anyways. And in terms of what error conditions and stuff you give, I think that all really comes down to this profile discussion that I was saying earlier, that we are not there yet. Okay? We need to get there, but we're not there yet. We'll happily have your help. Okay. Use the class of service kind of paradigm that Richelle was explaining last hour to avoid getting down in the weeds of implementations. One of the fundamental differences between SMIS, if you're familiar with that, and where we're trying to go with Swordfish is Swordfish wants to express to the end user what they can get, right? The services that are being provided. And then the user selects one of those things and says, go build one. In the SMIS case, it was more, you gave the end user a whole bunch of parts, and the user would then assemble those parts to deliver the kind of service that they wanted to get. So we're trying to do a service-based provision approach, which is very, very different for people that have in the past used an SMIS kind of thing where they configure every little detail. Class of service allows you to push every little detail part of it down into the implementation below the API. Okay? As I've said a couple times, we're going to need your feedback. As you begin to build out a system, you're going to discover that some things are easy and well specified, some things are missing, some things may be wrong, we hope not, but in any case, we need your feedback on these things. Preferably you join the work groups, but if at least you use the feedback portals to put in questions and get answers. And Richelle or I or other people that can help will help give you those answers. So don't be shy and please utilize that resource. All right, some considerations in the Redfish space. You're going to use it for bare metal hardware management, system configuration, but you're also going to use it as a base for network management, and that work is ongoing in the Redfish community. It is the base for Swordfish. Swordfish technically is only an extension against Redfish. It's added schema resources and its specification of, maybe you can use filters where Redfish said you couldn't and stuff like that. So expanding what of the OData infrastructure should be or could be used. So if you recall that picture, it's sort of like a filter kind of thing where actually, wrong picture. Go with that. So Redfish specifies a limited subset. It's not that limited. It's a subset of the OData. It provides, one of the things to take away is that it's Redfish that provides the service definitions or the infrastructure for the services for task management, for logging, for events. All that stuff, we're not reinventing it in Swordfish. We're utilizing the Redfish definitions. So it's truly an extension. You're going to have to support the Redfish V1 sort of service route, but be aware in the OData space, if you're trying to be OData conformant, that there is another service route. So it's a little bit of a wart and it's historical, but we'll have to live with it. There is the OData service route, which is defined as an entity container. In Redfish, it's defined as a resource called service container. There is in Redfish also an entity type that's called service route, which represents the Redfish service route. They are basically the same thing or almost the same thing. And as you implement, you'll have to deal with that, but it's not a big deal. And if you have trouble dealing with it, let us know. We'll tell you how to get around that issue. Another thing that you want to be aware of is that the OData, say that again? The OData ID, which is an annotation basically on every resource. The value of that has to be unique within the OData service, and by implication the Redfish service or the Swordfish service, across that service. All right? It's not intended to necessarily be globally unique number. It doesn't have to be, but it has to be unique within that service. all right? And it maps down to, in the OData world, it maps down to either what's called a singleton or an entity set. And those are basically fancy names for a collection of entities in the entity set case, or a single entity in the singleton case. The other thing, keep in mind, again, that almost all resources are optional. And that goes for the resource, the entity type definitions, and for the properties within them. All right, there's a few that are marked as annotated as required, but very few. It's going to be the profiles or your implementation rules that specify, which of those you can rely on. And we would love having help in fleshing out sort of use cases, profiles, if you will, that define feature sets, features that are built up of a complex arrangement of resources and their relationships and their properties that can be easily identified as a feature that the client can rely on. So when you choose your infrastructure, again, sort of Redfish native implementations, because of the limits on the Redfish spec, you can get away with a lot, all right, in terms of what you implement. But if you're going for Swordfish, which if you're here, you probably are, you're going to want to look at OData conforming infrastructures. Recall that OData is model agnostic. It doesn't care what the model is. It just allows you to specify with CSDL what the model is. And it's got a well-defined meta-model infrastructure, but it's model agnostic, so you can add whatever you want to it. And the other things you got to worry about, and I'll talk about these, I'll just move along here. There are a couple additional warts to worry about. One is this links complex type. Within almost every Redfish or Swordfish entity type definition, there is a property called links, and it has a complex type that's usually named links within the definition of the schema definition for that resource. The way that's intended to be used is properties that, or navigation properties, that point to resources that are not part of the, not a part of the instance that you're talking about, the entity that's created. Redfish calls them subservient. Fundamentally, it's whether or not those entities are contained in that other entity. Thinking about it like a document, if the entity's document goes away, so do those elements. If they're subservient, if they're not subservient, then they go in the links section as a navigation property. And so you can think about them as being independent of that resource. That's a by convention thing. OData has no knowledge. What OData does is use an attribute of the navigation property that's contains target equals true. Will tell you that it's a contained element that you're pointing to. Just be aware that those things are in the definitions, and when Redfish talks about them, that's what they're talking about. For the most part, I don't think it matters a whole lot. Other than, when you think about the life cycle of an entity, if it goes away, what goes away with it? Okay. So that's links. The other thing to think or to realize as you're implementing, especially if you're using an OData conformant framework, is that there's this special resource in Redfish called ResourceCollection. And it's subclassed and reused for many things, like computer system collection or a disk collection, or just any number of chassis collections, any number of things where it's created. I won't get into the details too much, but suffice to say that each one of these subtypes contains a member's property, which is actually a navigation property to a collection of the entities that it's trying to be a collection of. With OData, you would do a post to add to that list of members. You would do a post to the members collection. With Redfish, it allows you to alternatively do a post to the resource collection, and it's supposed to operate the same way. That's in the Redfish spec. And so the thing to be aware of is that in an OData conformant implementation that hasn't been extended to understand Redfish, then it's not going to understand a post to a resource collection resource. All right? Again, that's not a big deal to work through. So, sort of closing up, you need to worry about backwards compatibility to your legacy tools as you implement into these things. There's a couple sort of escape mechanisms. There's the OEM property in actions in almost all of the entity type definitions. You'll see that OEM property. That allows the vendor to extend a class definition or an entity element definition to include some additional stuff. Similarly, you can use message args to add additional message arguments to do the same kind of thing. My plea to you guys is don't do it unless you have to. All right? Instead, work with us at the standards committee to add those properties that you need into the model, unless they're really, really vendor proprietary stuff, and then have it there. Go do it. The other thing is that there is an active community, both in Redfish and Swordfish, that is continually developing new stuff into the standards, trying to work out how to deal with various issues and so forth. Please participate, at least listen in as you go along, because we're probably worried about the same kinds of things that you're going to be worried about, and it will be helpful to all concerned if you participate and help develop. And that, friends, is that.
We're giving away an Echo Dot. So please put your, I have both of you right here. So please put your business card in and we'll draw. But I think Carl's, I'm sorry, George is going to take questions.
I will. If and there are. Yes.
So, in Swordfish, is there accounting so this volume A is for customer A account, and this volume is for B's account, kind of authentication.
There is authorization. And that really comes from the Redfish side. You can specify, what users can log in, what their credentials are, and so forth through Redfish.
Log into Swordfish interface or log into the volume.
you log into the Swordfish interface, into the data management interface. And then you can specify for any type of resource what operations are allowed and by whom. So there's a fairly comprehensive thing there. Now, I wasn't sure whether you meant to ask about authorization or you meant to ask about accounting for different users, how much resource they're consuming. We did not have anything in there to try to track how much resources a particular user is consuming.
Again, an OEM extension could add that, but it's not in the standard.
Yep. Or we could add it in, if we understood what it was that we needed to track.
Yes, again, it's pretty easy. In general, it's going to be pretty easy to extend the standard. Either if the general model is going to be, 2 or more vendors. For right now, it's going to be 2 or more vendors. You agree something needs to go in, it'll go in.
Other questions? Good. Finished on time. Oh. Can I pick my own? No, I didn't put mine in here. We have Anand. You're in time.